Elias did not know he was being ignored. For a child, the world simply is. Its conditions are not compared but endured. His universe was a sprawling, silent house where the air was thick as water, and he was a small, quiet fish drifting through its rooms. His parents were not cruel. They did not shout or strike. They were, in fact, perfectly polite. They provided food, clothing, a roof that did not leak. But they provided these things the way a museum curator might dust a forgotten exhibit in a closed wing, out of a vague sense of duty, with no expectation of a visitor. Their attention, when it did fall upon him, was a glancing thing, a beam of light that illuminated not him, but the space he happened to occupy for a fleeting moment. "Did you do your homework, Elias?" his mother would ask, her eyes scanning a recipe book over his head. "Yes," he would whisper to her, retreating back. "Good," the heir would reply. His father's interactions were logistical. "Your dental appointment is on Thursday at 4. The car will be here at 7:45. They were statements of fact, directives issued to a pleasant but peripheral entity in his household. The silence in the house was not an empty one. It was a presence, a third, more substantial parent. It taught Elias his first and most enduring lessons. That his footsteps were too loud, that his laughter was a startling, almost inappropriate sound, that his tears were a private, messy inconvenience to be dealt with alone in the muffling fortress of his pillow. He learned to make himself small, to fold his limbs into tight packages on the sofa, to chew with a soundless mouth. He became a master of self-erasure. His emotional world became a secret, internal landscape. Joy was a furtive spark he learned to smother, for its expression garnered, at best, a puzzled glance. Sadness was a deep, cold well he descended into alone, the walls of his room his only witnesses. Anger was a luxury he could not afford, a volatile chemical that threatened to shatter the fragile, glass piece of the home. So, he swallowed it, and it settled in his stomach like a stone. He developed a rich, intricate inner life. The worn rug in his bedroom was a map of a forgotten continent. The pattern of cracks on his ceiling was a constellation telling stories only he could decipher. He had long, whispered conversations with the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunbeam that cut through his window. They were better listeners. They, at least, swirled and moved in response to his breath. At school, he was a ghost. He existed in the periphery of other children's vision. He knew the rules of social engagement only from observation, like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. He saw how other children commanded attention with a shriek of laughter, how they touched each other with easy familiarity, how they fought and made up with a fluidity that was magical to him. He tried, sometimes, to mimic it. He would offer a carefully rehearsed joke, but his timing was off. His delivery too soft. The other children would look at him, not with malice, but with a blank incomprehension, before turning back to their vibrant, noisy world. He was a pebble dropped into a pond that made no ripples. The psychological architecture of his being was built upon this foundation of absence. His core belief, unformed and unspoken, was that he was fundamentally uninteresting. Not bad, not worthy of hatred, simply negligible. His needs were an interruption. His presence was a mild atmospheric change, easily adjusted to and forgotten. He developed a hypervigilance to the emotional weather of his parents. He could read the subtle shift in his mother's sigh, the specific tightness around his father's jaw, and he would instinctively contract, making himself even less noticeable, hoping to avoid being the accidental cause of a displeasure he could not even name. This was his normal. This was the water in which he swam, the air he breathed. He did not know he was drowning in silence. He only knew that he was very, very lonely, and that the loneliness felt like a failure that was uniquely and entirely his own. The world was a party to which everyone else had been invited, and he was standing outside, nose pressed to the glass, believing with all his heart that he had simply lost the invitation, or worse, had never been sent one in the first place. He grew older, this quiet boy, carrying his invisible, weightless burden, completely unaware that the emptiness he felt was not a hole within himself, but the ghostly imprint of the love that should have filled him. The development of a false self, Elias's hypervigilance, his ability to read the subtle sigh of his mother, the tension in his father's jaw, is a brilliant survival adaptation. Psychologist Donald Winnicott called the development of a false self a defense mechanism. The child, to maintain the attachment to the caregivers, which is essential for survival, learns to suppress their own authentic feelings and needs, the true self, and instead presents what the environment requires. Because the authentic self is never seen or known, even by himself, too. Impaired emotional intelligence. Elias swallows his anger and hides his tears that he doesn't learn to identify, understand, or manage his emotions because they were never reflected back to him. Emotions are like a foreign language he overhears but never learns to speak. Psychological fact. Children from emotionally neglectful homes often grow into adults who are deeply uncomfortable with emotions, both their own and others. They may feel overwhelmed by strong feelings like anger or sadness, viewing them as dangerous or shameful. They might be described as numb or flat, or conversely, they might have unexplained outbursts because the suppressed emotion finally erupts. Elias's internal well of sadness isn't just a metaphor, it's a reservoir of unprocessed, unnamed emotion. The internalization of blame. A child's brain is egocentric. That it is less psychologically damaging for a child to think, "I am unlovable," than to accept the terrifying reality that, "my caregivers are unable to love me." Therefore, the child internalizes the failure of the relationship. Elias believes the problem is him. He lost the invitation to the party. He doesn't consider that there was no invitation sent. This leads to chronically low self-esteem and a deep-seated sense of shame. The shame is not about something he did, guilt, but about who he is. He feels fundamentally flawed, defective. This is why the social interactions at school are so painful. They are not just rejections, they are confirmations of his core belief, "I do not belong." 4. Attachment styles. Anxious or avoidant. The relationship with his parents creates an insecure attachment style. His needs are not met reliably. So he learns that relationships are unpredictable and unreliable. Psychological fact. As an adult, this often manifests as either an anxious preoccupied attachment, desperately seeking validation and reassurance, fearing abandonment, or a dismissive avoidant attachment, learning to suppress attachment needs, becoming fiercely independent and emotionally distant, like his parents. Elias, with his self-erasure, is already developing a strong avoidant style. He believes, "If I don't need anyone, I can't be hurt by their absence." The long shadow, adulthood and the moment of realization. The story you requested ends in childhood, but the psychological narrative continues. The ignored child grows up, often achieving a functional adulthood, but carrying this invisible blueprint. He might become an adult who struggles with intimacy. He never learned the dance of mutual vulnerability. He may choose partners who are similarly distant, or he may sabotage close relationships because the intimacy feels unfamiliar and threatening, feels a persistent sense of emptiness. He might achieve success, have friends, and build a life, but feel a something missing feeling he can't name. This is the echo of the emotional void. Is a terrible self-advocate. Having learned that his needs are an inconvenience, he finds it almost impossible to ask for a raise, set a boundary, or express a preference, is prone to depression and anxiety. The unprocessed emotions and chronic low-grade stress of the childhood environment take their toll. The moment of realization you described, next know what was his problem after he grew up, is a pivotal psychological event. It often occurs in therapy, or through a relationship with someone who finally sees him, or through the birth of his own child, which triggers memories of his own childhood. This realization is not an accusation of his parents, but a profound act of self-compassion. It is the moment he understands, the silence was not about my worth. It was about their limitations. The hole inside me is not my fault. This is the beginning of healing. It is the process of going back into that silent house of his psyche, finding the small boy drawing constellations on the ceiling, and finally giving him the attention, validation, and love he was always starving for. He learns to become the responsive parent to himself that he never had, transforming the silent, sketchy world of his childhood into one filled with color, sound, and connection.